There are currently right now a lot of very, very, very worried economists out here in the UK. Just yesterday, and probably from the talks about today, we will see even more worried economists talking about the potential problems that the UK economy is going to face. And this comes down, and one word in particular that you will be hearing a lot of by these economists is something called Trussonomics. This is going to be a defining word of the Truss administration. Like you heard the term during the Johnson administration, boosterism. The idea that you could talk up something and boost it up and make it bigger and more brighter than initially it really seemed. Well, Trussonomics is nothing really new, but it's something that has really going to define Truss and her administration, and that is straight up tax cuts, deregulation, less spending. And that is sort of really Trussonomics in a nutshell. But as always, it comes down to policy. And unfortunately, it is the fiscal policy that we will be seeing very, very soon on display by Truss and the rest of her team, who are, well, free market fundamentalists. And one of the biggest problems is that Truss and her fellow party members are ideologues in this concern and refuse to take any help or advice of the way that things are going. So before we get into today's article, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And of course, there is the one-off donation link called the YouTube thank you button down below as well. And there is also the YouTube Pony Club as well, where you get sort of badges, emojis, and super chat a month that you can use when we are live streaming. But today, like I say, and thank you very much to all the people who do support the channel, but today, we go over to a UK in a changing Europe, and they have one of their chief economists look at, well, Trussonomics and how this is going to affect the debt. And we are already, have seen under the Conservative government, a massive increase in the debt. And where does this go? Where does this leave us? To be honest, it doesn't make for some very good reading. I'll tell you that now. But we're going to get into it. And oh boy, we've got some serious, serious troubles ahead. So, like I say, this is the UK in a changing Europe, their commentary blog on Trussonomics and the deficit. Several years ago, after the surprise Conservative election victory in May of 2015, I wrote this. So, what does the non-reaction of the gilts market tell us? That, as far as financial markets are concerned, even significant changes about expected budget deficits and the government debt have little or no impact on long-term investment rates. The markets had been expecting the election of a Labour government, or indeed the promised coalition of chaos with Ed Miliband, which would have led to more government borrowing, perhaps by a little, perhaps by a lot. The re-election of Cameron and Osborne by a narrow but clear majority instead meant the continuation of austerity. But the gilt yields didn't budge. Bond markets shrugged. And I concluded, when Robert Pattinson's bond market pals tell him Mr. Market may be capricious and pushes up interest rates if the government borrows more, they were slandering him. It turns out Mr. Market is far more sensible than that. Several years on, however, it's a very different story. Mr. Market seems to be far more nervous about Liz Truss and her economic advisors than she was about Ed Balls and Ed Miliband. Sterling fell almost by 5% in August, while government bond yields, the interest rate paid on the UK government debt, has risen steeply. Both are indicators of a declining confidence in the direction of the UK economy. And although government bond yields have gone up everywhere, so it is by no means all of the rise can be attributed to UK policy. There's also been more in the UK than any other European countries or even the US. We shouldn't overstate this. The current market drama is not yet a crisis, and it may not become one. If I or any other economist could actually predict such sudden swings, the value of sterling or even interest rates, we wouldn't need our university jobs. Things could stabilize, but market predictions of the sterling and UK government debt have clearly changed. Unlike the 2015 election, we can't pinpoint one single moment in the current Conservative leadership contest where the market expectations about the future UK fiscal policy changed. But over the past month, three things have emerged. First, that Truss is committed to large permanent tax cuts relative to the fiscal plans of the Johnson administration. In particular, an imminent cut to national insurance and the reversal of the planned rises in corporation tax. Second, that because of these cuts benefit the primary and better off the larger companies, further large fiscal matters where tax cuts benefit increases or even some form of off-balance sheet financing will be required to mitigate the impact of the energy bill increases on households. And third, that all of this will be financed by borrowing for the foreseeable future. Meanwhile, earlier incoherent sound bites about, quote, paying off the COVID debt more slowly have been replaced by a frank acknowledgement from the influential economist close to Truss that the government will borrow more. Julian Jessup argues this: the Treasury has been too quick to believe you need to start paying the debt down. Far better to let the deficit take the strain. Patrick Minford goes even further, saying that there is no need to worry about the impact of tax cuts on the deficit because of the lava curve. The theory that the broad-based cuts in taxes will actually increase revenues, a claim generally regarded as laughable by economists in the Treasury and markets as well as in academia. Here, Trussonomics seems to converge with the proponents of modern monetary theory in thinking that the deficit simply isn't a problem. And that's another hallmark I think we're going to see, that the deficit is just not a problem, when really the deficit is a problem. It's something that you do need to keep an eye on. But the fact that you've got certainly people like Julian Jessup and Minford as Truss's economic advisors, and when you've got especially Patrick Minford, who's just been said there, not only is that considered laughable in the Treasury, markets, and in academia, we've got a serious problem ahead. And could this lead to a crisis? Well, as it said earlier, let's not overstate it, but let's not understate it either. We could end up in another big economic crisis for the UK caused by Truss's economic plans. That certainly seems to be on the cards. But as they said, if economists could predict such wild and swings like that, they wouldn't need their university jobs. But back to it. So, Trussonomics means more borrowing. But if over the last decade the deficit really mattered to interest rates or market confidence in the UK policy, what's the problem? If there is indeed a magic money tree, why not take advantage of it? The answer is that the economic context matters, and the current context is one of high inflation and rising interest rates. As I and Simon Wen-Lewis have pointed out, we do indeed pardon me, have an overwhelming evidence that both empirical and theoretical that in countries like the UK, which are at the zero lower bond for interest rates and which borrow in their own floating rate currency, more government borrowing doesn't push up interest rates. But While that was indeed the case in 2015, with the Bank of England having the rate having been stuck at least 0.5% for some years, it is very much not now. UK interest rates will be well off their floor and headed up. Inflation, of course, is running at about 10%. And under these circumstances, the impact and wisdom of extra borrowing is different indeed. None of this would surprise Keynes, of course, who was always clear about the flip side of his prescription of fiscal expansion in circumstances where savings were too high and the demand for investment too low. The boom, not the slump, is the right time for austerity at the Treasury. Paradoxically, this emphasizes just how misguided austerity was in the 2010s was. We had a decade when the government could have borrowed easily with no limits at very low interest rates, and doing so would have stimulated the economy overall. It would have avoided the hollowing out of the welfare state that has left us far more vulnerable to the social consequences of COVID and its aftermath, and helped to repair and improve Britain's creaking infrastructure. And the government chose not to, with deeply depressing results. And let's make that very clear. Austerity was always a choice by the Conservatives, always a choice by them. Anyway, continue. Now, however, the UK faces significant inflationary pressures. Interest rates are rising globally and in the UK, and Brexit and various other economic policy mistakes have reduced market confidence. It is just at this moment when the incoming administration looks as if it plans to increase borrowing significantly, both in the short and medium terms, and the legitimate criticism of Keynesian theory in the Treasury and elsewhere was always less about the theory than the practice. For the political or even bureaucratic reasons, the government would always need to get the timing of when to expand or contract very wrong, and the Conservatives seem deemed to prove this correct. So, as you can see here, the guy who wrote it, Professor Jonathan Portes, very big and sort of, I think, well-known economist, certainly in and around the universities scene. I think he's the senior fellow for the UK in a Changing Europe. Yeah, it's not looking good. The policies that we are going to get are going to be hard right policies. And what do the hard right libertarians always do? Tax cuts. Tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts. That's their solution to everything. Tax cuts, deregulation. And unfortunately, for the next 2 years, that's what we've got to look forward to. And I think, given how fragile our economy seems at the moment, I think when we see Truss and her, Trussonomics put into action, I think you are going to see very big and very severe consequences almost immediately take effect on the UK economy. And I think you can see that being reflected, as was mentioned earlier, that there is a lot of the confidence in the UK, the direction of the UK economic policy. A lot of people are going, well, we're in, I think, the stage of Brexit where the zealots have truly taken over. Remember, the ERG are now in control of the government. 80% of all, 88% of all Truss's appointments have been from the ERG. We are now in the true experimental phase of Brexit. And the ERG people, what are they? As we've said numerous times before, they are free market fundamentalists. They do not care about orthodoxy, the reasons not to do things. As you said before, Patrick Minford was their key economist guy. And yet, as you said as you saw in this article, his theory, laughable in the Treasury, in academia, in the markets. But these are the people Truss is being advised by. And I think we're in for some very, very hard times ahead. Very hard times ahead. But they will plow on regardless. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.